Hello. So I'm Anuraag, and I'm going to be sharing about some cool stuff you can do with Tofu if you don't just stop at configuring cloud resources. First, I'm going to ask, what is OpenTofu? Maybe it's a bit late in the day for this question, but I think everyone has some ideas of what they think of when they think of the word OpenTofu. Maybe it's related to the catch copy on the homepage, a tool for configuring infrastructure. It's a very useful definition. I think it is what most people use it for in their day-to-day jobs. But if we go a bit more deep and think of what is OpenTofu at a technical level, one definition I might suggest is a stateful, pluggable task runner with a lifecycle. Definitely not as simple of a name as the other one, but basically, Tofu is an orchestration tool for all of these things we call providers, and other things we'll call them plugins. And each plugin defines the schema for the config that the user inputs into Tofu, a schema for the state it's going to save, which Tofu handles for it, and then just implementations of these lifecycle events. And these are all written in Go, I think 100% of the time. And so at the end of the day, you just have some Go code in these lifecycle events. If they talk to a cloud platform's API, then they're configuring cloud, but they don't have to. They can really just be any Go code. So I have a demo to demonstrate that. Let's see. So I'm going to run tofu apply on this project and see what happens. So it starts up Doom. As you can see, it got started up. It's managed, so if I run apply again, it doesn't do anything because it sees that the thing is already up. But if I close the window, it'll also then see that it's not there, so it starts it up again, just like your Kubernetes service or something. And if I can then modify my config with another session. Now there's 2 sessions of Doom, twice the fun. But also, I can then just destroy them and they're gone. And so what we see there is all I did was implement those lifecycle methods with Go code, exec.command to start up a process, and we saved the PID into state to keep track of it. I don't think most people would consider these Doom sessions infrastructure, but it is still sort of a valid provider, I think. It's doing something. It's doing what I wanted it to do, which was start up Doom. And so I hope this demonstrates how Tofu can be much more than just a cloud infrastructure configuration tool. So now I'm going to go into some examples, more real world and what you might use at your job of how this factors in. I'm sure everyone has seen Kubernetes before, maybe used a Tofu to manage it as well. You might have a deployment and it's secret, that it just mounts into environment variables. If you want to connect your service to a database, you might need to provision a password for that service, have separate passwords for each service for security reasons. And back in the day, you might manually create a password, put it into a spreadsheet, copy it onto your command line to use kubectl secret to populate it. I mean, I've seen people do this, but at the end, generating a password can be implemented in Go code, so there is a random provider. It's not making any API calls, it just creates the password. And then if you wire it up into the Google provider's resource for a DB user and your secret, it all just gets connected together in one config file. No copy paste needed. If you wanted to extend it to then add mTLS between your services, you'll need some TLS certificates. There's also a TLS provider, which is similarly, the Go standard library has crypto, which implements all the primitives for TLS. So this is, again, not calling any API, but you can create TLS certificates within Tofu itself, and they get provisioned into the secrets. If you were to mark these resources ephemeral, they're not saved in your state if you're worried about that. I tend to just lock the state down with IAM and be happy, but people have their preferences there. But it's all really easy, and you can just manage all of this in one tofu apply command. We also see, so these are the environment variables that get populated to the service. And so I would also like to say then we can connect not only these different resources within our tofu config, but it's also helpful to connect back to your code. So if you're an organization with several teams, hopefully you have some framework for your server development. And so if you then have your framework know what's happening on your infrastructure side, like it knows that these are the environment variables being populated, you just put them inside your framework, and your developers don't have to worry about how they get their TLS set up, how they get their database passwords, because the framework code is now aware of the infrastructure is aware of what the framework needs, and by connecting these two together, you can just have everything work together and forget about them. Of course, some developers might come to you and say, I'm pushing code, how can that access my database? That's really scary or something. But at that point, you can also say tofu is code as well. If you're interested, you can read the code. Or if you're not, you can just forget and be happy that everything just works without much effort. So I'm going to get into the main demo now, which is bootstrapping a new project. So say you have a new idea. In this case, I'll say I have an idea for a very awesome tool to search for cat videos. It's going to be much better than YouTube, make me lots of money, but first I have to start developing. And so I often use GCP, so that's what this example will use. All the concepts work for any cloud provider. And you need the GitHub repos as well to manage. I tend to have 2 repos, one for code and one for infrastructure. And in this case, I'm considering GitHub to not be the cloud. Usually when we refer to cloud, I think we refer to GCP, AWS, Azure type of providers. But if we want to create them with Tofu, it's sort of easy. You can define these resources and get your project and repository, but they're not going to really be able to do much until you connect them. So let me show a video. This one I recorded because I need to skip time, or else we would have to wait for a lot of things. So I'm going to just apply first a project. I'll show some of the code later. I am also using CDK because I find it to be very convenient for abstracting things. And it's going to start provisioning some resources using the Google and GitHub providers. And this will take some time, so let me show what is actually in the code. So I have this one stack. This is the bootstrap. So I generally call it sysadmin. So the sysadmin is the lowest, the sort of most secure, I guess, the most privileged members in the organization will be bootstrapping these projects in a way that then developers can extend them later. And it's a very standard thing with some providers. And then one thing I call bootstrap. So this is like a Terraform module. In HCL, you'd use a module. In CDK, you use a construct. They're very similar. And so this is one I defined to handle all the resources for bootstrapping a project, named it cat search. Ignore the 10. That's how many takes it took me to get this video done. The GCP project IDs can't be reused very easily. But that's basically all I added. So once you have an idea, just give it a name, and then you can run tofu apply to provision a lot of resources to get it going. Going back to, so provisioning. Imagining doing all that with console operations, right? We got through 109 resources. And so now let me just show you sort of what we got out of that. I accidentally opened Slack, I meant to open browser. And so here's GitHub, my notifications. I got a new notification. So it's a PR to this new repo that was created for the infra. Tofu actually created this PR. We'll get back to the PR later. First, let's see the settings of this repo. So because it's in code, I can just make sure that all of my best practices are implemented in the settings, squash and merge and stuff. We have rule sets for the branches. I think most people set these for the repositories. The main branch, you don't allow force push. You require a pull request before merging or something. Release branch, it's prefixed by release, and it can only be operated on by repository admins, so you don't allow creations by freelancers and stuff that have write access to your repo. Only admins will be able to create the release branch. And then we have GitHub environments, so I like to define these 4. Dev viewer is for PRs, so it has no rules, and then dev is for the main branch pushes that automatically deploys to a dev environment. Prod viewer will have view access to the prod environment, and it's only from release branches. Prod is also only for release branches. So the GitHub provider is a bit flaky. I didn't want to take an 11th take, so it does sometimes not reflect the setting in the first apply. And so I got a bit confused while making this video, and then I ran apply a second time to get this setting to kick in, which is, let's see. Okay, reviewers for this environment. So this environment also requires manual review by the admins before you'll be able to write to prod. And we'll see what that means later. So on the GCP side, we can look at the service accounts. So there is one service account for the Terraform viewer for plans and one for admin for write. So one has full write access to the project. And if we look at the permissions for the service account, we see that it allows the cat search infra repo's prod environment access to the service account. So only the prod environment, that thing that only allowed repository admins to create the release branches and had manual review, can access write. Similar for the viewer one, we set the permission to that prod viewer. And on the dev project, we have the same things, but for dev viewer and dev. And so with this, we have the repository and the GCP project connected. And we will be able to then deploy things automatically using CI/CD. So this is the PR that Tofu created. So Tofu, GitHub provider, actually allows even creating PRs. It might feel a bit weird because PRs feels like this ephemeral thing, but they are still state within GitHub. You can't. It's hard to delete a PR, and Tofu will just ignore. Like if you don't merge the PR, it'll just ignore that, and that's fine. So you can give your repo owners the option of whether they want to use this PR or not. And if you change the files on the Tofu side, it'll send a new PR. So I found that actually works surprisingly well. The contents of this PR is just to set up the CI workflows with GitHub Actions. There isn't any code yet to deploy. That's still on my computer. And so I'm going to push my code onto this PR so that the CI can work. And so we see GitHub Actions is now running. Now there's actually code to build. And so it's going to run through Tofu init and run the plan. And we see that the plan gets posted to the GitHub pull request. We can confirm what's about to happen if you merge the pull request by checking out this plan output that was sent. And if we merge, the main branch CI starts, and it'll push the changes to dev. All set up just by that one tofu apply command. So I showed the sysadmin configuration, the bootstrap, and this is the actual app configuration. I have this framework called CurioStack. I hope everyone has their own framework that they like. And this, again, it's connected to the code. So this is what sets up the infrastructure to then be used from my server code. The server code uses OpenTelemetry, so the Tofu abstraction automatically sets up OpenTelemetry collector and configs. It uses identity platform for auth, so of course the Tofu automatically sets that up. It pushes Docker images to a repo called Docker, so the Tofu also creates an artifact registry repo called Docker to make sure that the app can be deployed to it. And so the main build is going. It's just a normal, there isn't really much to see here, but oops. So the main build finished, and so now I'm going to start a release build that pushes to prod. That's just creating a release branch, and then the CI/CD will pick it up and deploy to prod. So I'm just going to get that kicked. Before now going back to, so this is showing that the release build has been kicked. But I'm going to now go to the actual code repo. So the Bootstrap created two repos. One was for the infrastructure, one for code. The code is empty. Who knows, is it going to be a Python AI thing? Is it going to be a mono repo with lots of services or whatnot? So for now, we just set up an empty repo that has permissions to deploy to GitHub to the artifact registry we just provisioned with that main build. And I'm going to just push some code. It's not really important what the code is. This is just to demonstrate that when there is code with the CI workflow on this repo, we now get a main build that will run through lint, and then it will push a Docker image. Too many lint checks. And it's all set up. So the permissions were all set up by Tofu to make sure that this GitHub repository is connected to Google. And the developers don't have to worry about how they get their images to Docker. It just works. And so now I look back at my GitHub notifications, and we see that there's a request to review a deployment. So this is what I showed you, the manual review process for the prod environment, where it has only run the plan step so far, and it's waiting to apply to prod it. And so as an admin, now I can look at the plan output that it's going to apply, make sure it's not going to destroy the whole service and lose lots of money. And once it's known that this plan is fine, I can then approve the step to apply it. And so after this manual step, it gets deployed. Of course, this is all configurable, so you don't need to do manual review if you don't want to. But I like having that safety step there. By the way, this feature requires GitHub Enterprise for private repos. I wish it was more available to normal pro team users, but for open source repos, it also works fine. So, yep, so that's the demo of how to bootstrap a project. I mean, I can do this all day if I just have one idea. Next one is dog search. Just make the bootstrap again, and all it takes is changing the name, and it all gets deployed with one tofu apply command. I did talk to the CTO of the biggest payments app in Japan before, and he was saying it's the most important thing is to move fast. We have to release fast as a startup to get audience and then revenue, and so we don't have time to do CI, is what he said. And I was like, it's just one tofu apply command. Does it really take that much time to get your CI going? So this was sort of a demo of if you connect GitHub and GCP. Oops, this is video. So, by the way, so the constructs I made, they're all open source. I wouldn't say they're currently well designed to be used by others. There's no documents or even published artifacts, but they can be used if you just add a Git reference in your package JSON. If you want to try it out. Otherwise, more importantly, maybe you can just refer to the code inside for ideas of what resources you can do. And yeah, if you connect the dots between cloud and GitHub, you don't have to worry about them. Like, to reproduce all those steps every single time would take forever, but every time I have a new idea, I can just deploy it with one tofu apply command and then just focus on the actual app experience. So one more topic. This one is more hypothetical. I can't say I've tried it before, but it's one I really want to try, which is company employee onboarding, probably more for startups and such, but there are so many services you have to create accounts for many employees. I mean, some will have good SSO, some will have just being able to log in, but you still have to provision the user. But if you look through the registries, you find that already many of the services do have providers, and some of them don't, but the Doom provider took less than an hour to build for me. I mean, obviously it's very easy, and Go is my main language, so it's easier, but they don't tend to be that complex. The scaffolding project to create a Terraform plugin is very easy to use, and so if you have a service that doesn't even have a provider, I would definitely consider implementing one, because if you imagine just creating a tofu module or a CDK construct with all of these set up for each employee you hire, set them even digital camera snapshot and NFC, sorry, that's NFC tag. You set them down in front of a camera, put their smartphone on an NFC reader and hit tofu apply, and it'll then read in their face, read in their NFC, and provision all of the resources automatically so that they're onboarded. No need for a huge wiki page to go through every single time someone joins. I want to try this. The further you go from the cloud, the more you need buy-in from other people. Like, I think most HR heads won't like this idea, but maybe if you're founding a startup, definitely if I was, I would want to try this, and because I really, really don't like long readmes. And yeah, so wouldn't have to remember all these steps and go through them and forget. Like, these steps do get forgotten often, and then someone has to come back and say, oh, where's my Datadog access or something? So if we all just connected with Tofu, we can just forget about them. So in conclusion, I feel Tofu can do way more than just configure cloud infrastructure, and it's really useful if you take advantage of that. When there's something you think you want, there might already be a provider for it. The registry is huge. And if there isn't, it's not that hard to write a provider, so I would definitely consider writing one. And it's even helpful, like, of course, there are many talks about tens of thousands of state files and stuff. Tofu is very useful in these huge enterprises, but even just for your weekend side project, I mean, if you already have the abstraction there, then you just run it and you get your side project rolling without worrying about anything. So I think Tofu can scale high and low down to even a single person and still be useful. So those are my big takeaways for everyone to think about. So that's my talk. Thanks for listening. This is the QR code for the feedback. And if you have any questions, also feel free to find me and ask or send an email. Always happy, and also happy to take some questions now.
Thank you. Do you have any tips for managing drift when you want to configure things with Tofu, and it's also like to configure it for something that's very GUI centric? So like, how any tips on managing drift in those cases?
Not sure I understand the question of, so drift as in if someone, so for example, if someone closed their Doom session, and how do you manage that sort of drift, or?
So the example would be you use Tofu to configure a whole GitHub account, and then, but you're also giving permissions to that person to then go into the user interface and change those settings.
Right.
So then, like, that creates drift.
Got it. So yeah, especially in this case, the pull request is also an example of one that it can be merged or it can be closed, and that's an example of that drift. I think it's gonna be up to sort of the goals of the platform team, how much control they want to give to the developers. First of all, so you decide what should be managed strictly by Tofu and what you allow developers to change. And if you want, for example, if you want to make sure the description doesn't get changed, you would probably just run Tofu regularly to have it reverted back until they get annoyed, and then they ask you and you say, no, stop changing the description. Otherwise, if you want to allow it, then you make sure that you use the lifecycle ignore statement to ignore the fields. Like, I think it's totally fine to use ignore. Sometimes it feels a bit icky, but at the end of the day, there are these cases you want to only create, but then leave it up to the other team to, like, it's not even drift, it's allowed or something, right? And so deciding what is allowed, modeling them as ignored lifecycle changes, what isn't allowed, and just make sure it's reverted back if it gets changed. I think that's my tips for that. Any other questions? If not, all right, thanks all.